Sometimes founders take too long to make the choice or decide what they need to do. Sometimes
We were 1 week away from getting cash in bank of a $50 million round, and lockdown happened.
The actual superpower is actually firing.
But keep in touch. We're just talking about it, right? Those VCs will tell you, we love you as a founder. Keep in touch.
Hi everyone, welcome to Rebalance's 10th Accelerator cohort. We're so excited. I think we've had so much fun past few days. We're thrilled to begin this cohort with over 25 founders who are here. I think this time for a change, majority founders are about maybe from Delhi NCR, but we've got some people who've also flown in to be here with us today. So this is the orientation week and also day 2 of the program. So I'm Aishwarya, co-founder at Rebalance, and I'll be moderating this conversation with Anu and Priyanka. I think most of you guys are familiar with them, but I'll just do a very quick intro about what they're building at the moment. So we're familiar with Priyanka as she previously founded Popexo, one of India's largest digital platforms for women in India. And now as serial entrepreneur, she's building Colux, a new age fine jewelry brand, reimagining everyday luxury with lab-grown diamonds. So we're thrilled to have her here with us. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And Anu, I think also both of them are friends, and Anu has actually been also a friend of Rebalance for a long time. She was part of, I think, batch 2 as well. One as well. Yeah, absolutely. And she's also been a serial entrepreneur. She was building Oxford Caps when we actually met her. And as well as few women building in real estate, I think very few women were building in that space back then. And now she's building Acacia, a climate tech SaaS company to help real estate companies decarbonize through data intelligence and sustainable materials. And of course, I'll also pass it on to them to share a little bit more about what they're building as we begin the conversation. And of course, a quick brief on also what Rebalance does, since, just for the benefit of the entire room. So Rebalance is one of the most active accelerator programs that focuses on female founders. We've hosted over 200 plus founders across now 10 cohorts, and we've backed over 30 companies, of which 85% today are women. And we're also India's first angel community that is 60% women. That's why this room makes it very, very easy for us to open up and have this conversation in the most candid format. And, we just hosted a session on mercenary versus visionary founders. Where do we place ourselves? How does it work in terms of founder mindset? We've also spoken about fundamentals of unit economics, why it's really important to have that really, really clear from day one to build a very solid foundation over the last few days. And we've also listened to perspectives from operators and VCs. But today we have founders to share their perspective and we talk about the hard things. So today the conversation is going to be about the hard things that no one tells us about being a founder. Right? And and I'm going to start with a common question for both of you, right? So both of you chose very different spaces, tech and consumer, right? And previously also real estate, very hardcore spaces to be in. So now you've both spent over a decade building companies, right? So what convinced you that when you were starting Acacia, when you were starting Colux or Popexo or Oxford Caps, that this problem was worth solving? So just want to know a little bit about the early days and the why. Yeah, we can begin with either one of you again.
I think the first time around with Oxford Caps, it was more of we know real estate and, we had to do something what was familiar, and that kind of seemed like an interesting problem coming from the industry that we were in. So first time around, I think it was a combination of just familiarity with the space and kind of identifying a problem there. Second time around, I think it's more of a conscious decision as to what kind of, because now you know what kind of a founder you want to be, what kind of day-to-day problems excite you, what problems drain you. So I think second time around, it's more of a conscious call of, you may still be able to identify 2-3 problems in the areas which you specialize in, the industry you're from. But there would be one specific problem that you feel really deeply about. And I think that's how I landed up at Acacia. Sustainability, needless to say, all of us should feel more deeply about it.
Yes.
But unfortunately, not many do, including Mr.
Yes.
So I was very passionate about the area, and out of everything that I saw as a problem, I think that is the problem I wanted to work on for 20 years, because what you learn the first time around is it's not just enough to show up at work. It's not the same as doing a 9 to 5, which I did for almost 10-12 years in a corporate career. It kind of takes a part of your life, if not your whole life. So you have to like really believe in what you're doing to be able to feel excited about it for next 20 years, right? So I think that kind of comes more to surface when you're doing it the second time around.
I think Sham doesn't feel deeply about anything.
Except what?
It's absolutely right. So also remember context, right? So both of us started our first companies when the ecosystem was not what it is today. So right now you're sitting in this fabulous accelerator. They've been doing it for 10 years. The funding ecosystem has matured a lot. I mean, I know like analysts that I first started are now GPs in their own funds right now. So we've seen a whole cycle of people also mature and turn over. So back when both of us started, it was the same, right? I mean, I knew content and it just kind of felt interesting. My first pitch for PopXO, I don't know how many of you I was just thinking whether you guys have aged out of the original PopXO cohort. So the first pitch for PopXO was that there are no content platforms for women in India back in the day, and there were none at that time. We'll build one. We'll get lots of audience. We got that. We had 60 million users by the time we sold PopXO. And we'll make lots of money. Didn't do that, right? So you're naive enough in a positive way to not know everything, which is why you're able to jump into something because you're passionate about it, which is great. But remember that it has to stand the test of time, right? So we got 60 million users, but we were not able to become profitable. Media is just a hard business to be in, and making money in media is just hard. If there are any media startups here, please talk to me right now while you guys still have time, right? So that is like a very frank realization you should realize when we were 5 years into the business, because we kept trying to do everything and we were not actually able to make recurring revenue. And being a VC-funded company is all about predictability of your revenue sources. If you're able to do that, that's basically that's product market fit in a way. If you have on a small base, you can say that I spend X amount of money and I'm able to make X plus Y amount of money consistently and predictably. That's basically what your PMF is. So that was the PopXO experience. I became kind of a venture partner for a year, and I realized that I didn't like investing so much. I think as a founder, when you do it for long enough, physiologically your body gets used to the ups and downs of the hormones that hit you all the time. And when that flatlines, you really I actually felt a physiological change in how I was feeling, but everything was just like that. It was not here. It was just there. And that got a bit boring for me, and I think I just rebelled against that. And so with Kolux, it just became, again, something that I was passionate about. But I also saw a huge consumer technology difference, which doesn't really happen very much in consumer, right? You see tech changes happen, and suddenly a whole new AI industry is born. In consumer, it doesn't happen. In consumer, the only one I can think of is horses and cars. I can think of your touch phones and your touch screens and your BlackBerry and Apple. So those consumer changes happen so rarely, right? When the whole industry basically is forced to kind of shift. With lab diamonds, that's what's happened. So a whole thing called natural diamonds has been superseded by something called lab diamonds. That's a huge consumer issue. The whole market has to basically change for that. That's what excited me. And the second thing is I just felt that I love the product. I really love jewelry as a product. And so it's early days for us at Kolux. Much like you guys, we've been transacting for now 5 to 6 months. But it's been really good. We are seeing very strong, early kind of strong PMF is what we are seeing. So to date, we've done around 1.2 CR worth of business. Our AOV is around 1.5 lakhs. We are seeing 33% repeats happening, 50% referrals happening. So all of those are very strong, high indicators that what we have as a product is basically working. So I'm also in your boat, by the way. Like I'm very early on. I'm an early stage startup in that sense. But at least this time around, we have the comfort of knowing that the product is there. We are able to see a way of having recurring revenue, and we know we don't run out of cash. So the biggest worry that you have as a founder is you raise some money and then you basically run out of cash before you're able to prove any form of thesis that the next investor can rely on. So that is kind of that valley of death that, I mean, any amount of money you raise, remember, it's only going to last you, if you're lucky, is for 18 months. So today you raise your first check. In 9 months' time, your investor deck should be ready. By month 12, you should know who your next investor is going to be, because in month 18, you're going to run out of cash. So as a founder, you're always fundraising. I fundraise in my sleep, I feel. You know, if I'm sitting next to someone at dinner, I'm fundraising there, or I'm selling them jewelry at this point. So I think that's very kind of good for you guys to know that your first job is actually fundraising. Your second job is doing whatever that your kind of company or your thesis is basically going to be. Because if you can't keep capital in the business, then, I mean, your job as a founder is basically done then.
And I think if you're multiple co-founders, one of you is always fundraising, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So true. In fact, you touched upon something that I wanted to bring up for the next, question as well. I think PMF is something we wanted to talk about. A lot of us are beyond our MVP in some way, right? But PMF is something that some companies achieve much later also. Right? And there's a lot of bad advice out there when it talks about PMF. So I wanted to understand whether for previous companies or your current companies, what are the early signals that you look at where you're like, okay, this is working and this is worth pursuing in terms of early demand? It could be customers, it could be early validation in different ways. So maybe like really pointed, practical, suggestions on what they could look at as early PMF signals. Any one of you guys can.
To be very different businesses. One is enterprise and one is consumer.
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of mysticism around what PMF is, but if I have to really practically put it out, I would say if you make a business plan, useless for the most part, but in early days, but if you were to set your targets in the business plan and consistently for say 3 to 6 months, depending on how long your sales cycle is, if you're able to meet those targets, or at least be in a 10% up or down range, and you are with 90% confidence able to project your sales for next 6 months, I would say that's when you have PMF, because then you understand your customer, you know what price you can sell at, the sales engine is working, and there is potentially some repeatability into it, right? Repeatability, I think, is the underlying word to say PMF, right? So if I have to very plain vanilla language kind of look at whether I've achieved PMF, be honest with myself, past 3 months, what targets did I set up for myself? Did I come close to achieving it? And with that knowledge, can I confidently project my next 3 months just in terms of top line?
Yeah.
Right? In terms of number of sales, your AOV, right? And I think that's when you should be able to say you've got early PMF. But then, see, early PMF is very different from getting PMF at scale, right? So the way you sell to your 5th customer is not going to be the way you sell to your 500th customer, right? So PMF is not a fixed, vantage point. Like every time you double, your number of top line or triple your top line, but you have to again look at PMF, whether you have PMF at that scale, and probably some other metric kind of, becomes more important at that point. Maybe once I'm at 5-10 CR of ARR, just the top line matters, right? But once I'm getting to 50-100 CR, then I have to start looking at gross margins or unit economics more deeply and how to optimize to get the PMF, right? But I think initial days, if you just track your top line against the targets and you feel confident about your forward targets, I think that should be a good signal of saying that you have PMF.
Just one follow-up question on that before we also come to you, Priyamka. So when we are looking at these early signals, maybe an example of how should you think about your first year in terms of in enterprise, especially we've got a couple of folks who are building consumer tech here is also, and also SaaS. So just to understand, what is that first mark like for Akashia? What was it? How did you think about the first year? What kind of run rate makes sense and from that perspective?
So see, SaaS is now kind of toppled over its head, right? So it's very difficult to give numbers of how you should look at it, because there's some even B2B AI companies who are able to get to like 40, 50 million ARR in the first year itself, right? So, but if I talk of pre-AI days, a very good SaaS company would be kind of a 1 million ARR in the first year, right? After you've done some pilots, right? So depending on where you are, if you've already taken your product to market, you've done some pilots, then, and again, depending on your sales cycle, probably a 500,000 to 1 million ARR is what I would say would be first a decent, first 12 months would be a decent, we kind of hit our first million in about 15 months after our pilots, right? But a lot depends on what the product is. A sales cycle is kind of the biggest determinant.
I think for you, the sales cycle must have been longer.
Our sales cycle was almost 6 months.
Yeah,
Right? So then that is a very difficult business to be in if that's your only business, because then what you're trying is you're basically just kind of initially giving out a lot of free pilots.
Yeah.
Right? Getting people hooked to your product so that in the hope that 2-3 months later they find it valuable enough, it's so integrated in their system that they start paying for it, right? And they start looking for expansive features.
Yeah.
So there you have to kind of be very strategic of just giving them enough during that pilot phase so that they get it becomes an integral part of the operations.
Yeah.
But still reserving some features which can only unlock once they start paying for it, right? So that's a very strategic call. But initially, for first 6 months, you're basically just kind of trying to get as many pilots as possible,
And
right?
feedback as well.
And feedback, yeah. You're basically kind of
Building the product.
yeah. With 1 million ARR, if you're talking of like our product at that time when we started, now a lot has changed. We are talking of 150 to 200K of ACV, right? So basically talking of 1 million ARR, we're talking of 5 clients, right? So you basically Monday to Friday, 1 day each, you are living in that client's office.
Yeah.
Right? Just kind of observing how people are using it, not using it. Because what also happens, the biggest death valley in technology businesses where you sell the technology, people fancy it, they buy it, but nobody uses it. Right? You're just surprised how many people, 99% of people, their first instinct is not to use it. Because as human beings, we always have an inertia for new things. Like I attended this, I didn't remember, it was SaaS Week or something in LA 2 years back, where they had the H&M CTO on one of the panels. And he said this very good thing where he said a CTO in a corporate like me is hired with the single job description my single job description is not to buy SaaS, right? And that is your bio, right? So selling, I think, is easier, but making sure that revenue keeps coming depends on whether people are going to use it or not. Right? And that's where when you're in the pilot phase, it's very important that you park yourself in the client's office and just kind of make sure that they are able to see the value by using it. And if you think that there's a company which there is enough inertia that you may do whatever, howsoever useful the product is, they're not going to use it, I would say early days, don't waste your time there.
Very useful. And I think switching gears to consumer now from tech. So would love your view also on early signals for PMF and how to think about the first 12 months.
Yeah, so again, depending on the product that you're selling, let's just take maybe a broader, take a step back, right? Founder optimism is a wonderful thing, but you also have to be brutally honest with yourself. Look, as a founder, you have to be happy. You're meeting an investor, life is good. You're meeting a fellow founder, life is great. Unless, of course, it's a very good friend that you can actually have a proper discussion with. But how you present yourself is the signal that the market is basically getting. If tomorrow, if I came into this room low energy, I'm feeling really tired, I haven't slept last night, then you guys will get a feeling that maybe Kolaks mein sab kuch theek nahi chal raha hai, right? So the point is that your energy as a founder is very, very important. I'll give you a very tiny example back in PopExo days. I left home, something happened at home, I was in a bad mood, I was on the phone, I kept walking in the phone the whole time, and it was a big office, it was co-works actually, maybe there were 150 odd people in the same office, maybe we had 150 team members on the floor. So I just walked from the entrance to my room, I didn't talk to anyone, I didn't say, I was just on the phone, I looked stressed, and by the time I walked from there till my room, or till my desk, I got a message from one of my seniors saying, PG, is everything okay? Like, people are worried that the investors back out. Right? Because they saw my face, and for some reason, because they knew that we were in conversations with investors, suddenly it just became Chinese whispers, right? So the point being that your founder energy is so important, and every time you're stepping out of your private domain, people are reading into it. So then, as a founder, you learn to project. So, which is a great thing. That's founder optimism. I always have that. But then you also need to be hyper realist with yourself as a founder, with yourself and maybe with one or two close team members. कहाँ क्या फटा हुआ है आपको हमेशा पता होना चाहिए, and you should always acknowledge it. Because when you make business plans on Excel spreadsheets, it's super easy. Just change one number, then suddenly it's all like rosy, right? Or you just tweak, okay, maybe there's a variance is too much, for some assumptions को tweak कर देते हैं. So we tend to play those games with ourselves, right? But I think that's something you should never actually do, because that's basically where you can assume a PMF, convince yourself that there's a PMF when there actually is none. So your job as a founder, no matter what you're building, is to be brutally honest with yourself and tell yourself in time, boss, this is not working. Let me figure something else out. Because the faster you're able to do that, the longer time you have to and capital you have to make up for maybe what was a misassumption at some point, right? So when you're looking at a PMF, now coming to PMF from a consumer lens, early days, it's kind of depending on the on what product it is and what value of the product it is. In the early days, it's extremely hard, right? Because say you're selling a lipstick or you're kind of building a beauty brand, your numbers are bet by definition. No one's going to know your brand. Your marketing costs are anyway going to be high, so it's going to be very hard to decide whether is there a PMF or not. For me, the best way that I would predict whether there genuinely is some sort of a fitment happening is by actually talking to a lot of consumers and being really honest. That's the feedback that I'm getting. Are they actually do they actually want my product, or are they just trying to make me happy right now? So I think once you're able to get a genuine sense of that and then bake that into your product and then bake that into your model, probably for me that kind of really worked out. And again, I'll just give you a Colax example. So again, second time founder, I mean, this is what brand हम पहले बनाएंगे. Typically, a brand gets built on the fly, because building a brand is the last thing that you want to do as a founder, right? Because you don't have the time or the luxury of it. This time I thought I have a little bit of time, I have the luxury. Let's build the brand first. Did that, launched the website, thought that people would buy jewelry online. They didn't. But then we didn't spend a lot of capital or a lot of time in kind of trying to fix something that actually would never have been fixed. Very quickly, we went into solutions, admitted the fact, okay, people aren't checking out of the website. What can we do to shift that quickly? I think within 6 weeks, we had a plan B. That plan B ran for a while, morphed into a plan C, and suddenly, like, we kind of have what I now actually consider as pure PMF, because we are not going to run out of money, and we know exactly where the next 2 months of sales is basically coming from forward, right? So I think it's very important to be honest with yourself.
Very, very true. I think so valid and very useful for the kind of stage of companies that we have here as well. And I think, of course, we spoke about as founders, you also have, ways in which you project yourself to your team, to just, because you're also managing so many stakeholders, right? So I think that also gives us a very nice segue into the next question, which is, just want to take both of you back and just, in a very, very candid space, to share maybe a tough moment during either of the, or maybe they were all days that were tough, I don't know. But any significantly difficult time, whether, things like where you had to pivot or really had to make a very hard call, can just give us some perspective on.
You start with
yeah. No, I'm just wondering how much what level of, how far do you want to go here? See, look, the fact that you chose to be an entrepreneur and you chose not to have a steady, well-paying job that gets you kind of hits your account every month predictably, unless you really screw up, is a big decision, right? All of you are young. There's a cost of your time. If that's the burden that you're willing to take on, it basically means that every day is going to be hard, right? So if you're able to calibrate your emotions, I think that's basically how you get out of the tough spots. Because tough spots are going to be there. COVID happened. We had 175 people on the books right now. I couldn't pay salaries. In the middle of COVID, from that first town hall Zoom things that we started, I had to tell 175 people, some of whose families were depending on the money that they were bringing in, that boss, I can't pay you. I mean, it's hard. I had to call up all my investors and say, guys, we're out of money. We are kind of putting the company on ice right now. But then you have to do it. You have to you have to deal with it basically, right? And that was hard. And then, okay, let's go and find someone to basically sell the company to. Took us 6 months, but we managed to do that. So, I mean, that's a very extreme kind of decision. The only one thing I'd probably want to say is that the people you hire are going to be one of the biggest predictors of whether you succeed or not. So if your first superpower is raising capital, your second superpower should be hiring. Again, no matter what business you're basically running. But the actual superpower is actually firing, right? So if you don't fire someone, especially an expensive hire in time, it basically will become again a death knell for the company. I'll give you kind of how I think about it, right? Say I've hired someone with great fanfare, you bring someone in, investors are happy, team is happy, a really big shot has basically joined the company. That's great. But then suddenly within a month you realize maybe this person is not working out. Within 2 months you realize this person is really not working out. If by the end of the second month you haven't had that hard discussion, this person thinks, boss, this doesn't seem to be working out. I really love you, but this is not working out. We need to figure something out. The next 3 months, let's make these things happen. And if these things don't happen, you'll have to leave. If you don't do that, if you keep this person on, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost your team morale. And if this person's sitting in a revenue role, you really are screwed, right? So if you're able to, and for me, like that was just one of the big challenges that I had in PopX. So we just didn't take that decision fast enough. So now I'm like extremely, I don't know whether you've read The Hard Thing, about hard things. If you guys haven't read this book, it's like required reading. I read it at least once a month. And I've read it once a month for the past 10 years. So I actually know most of it by heart. So they have this section on this exactly. You ask yourself, if knowing what I know about this person, would I hire this person today? Right? And if that answer is absolutely not, you need to fire that person quickly. If that answer is yes, but I need to make some things work, get those changes in. But if your gut feeling is I would never hire this person again, if I knew what I knew about this person, you get rid of that person. So again, I'm not giving a very specific hard decision, but for me, firing is kind of that. Firing the people who are not a fit. They might be great people, they're just not a fit for your company. Do that quickly, and you need to manage, again, your personal management is really, really important.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it takes a lot of strength to also share, about tough moments as a founder. I really appreciate it. And I'm over to you. Same question. Any specific period you want to point out to which was tough? I think COVID was also one time.
So very similar. Yeah. We were about 200 CR in annual revenue, which went to zero overnight. We had just signed, we were 1 week away from getting cash in bank of a $50 million round, you may remember, Aishwarya. And lockdown happened and we went to zero account. And that round went to hold, right? So most of what Priyanka said, similar things, can't pay the staff, you have to let go. Some stuff you newly hired, like the first day of joining,
anticipation.
You have to let go, right? So point is, you are like maybe the current Iran defense minister, right? You are in a situation where by design, you're going to lose. Yeah. You don't have the resources, you're in a tough spot, you're fighting against the big guys, there's nobody coming for support, people are talking, you like you as a founder, but keep in touch, we're just talking about it, right? The VCs will tell you, we love you as a founder, keep in touch, but you are just 1 week away from running your company in ground, right? So if you've chosen this role, you have basically chosen an impossible position to succeed in, right? All odds are stacked against you, except I think your willpower. And I use willpower very carefully because I think as a founder, you mature only when you learn balance. What Priyanka kind of touched upon, वो zen वाला moment होता है ना, like not being too happy, not being too, like, because the highs are very high, the lows are very low. But you cannot
Live in either.
Yeah. Right? You cannot be very high, you cannot be very low, because you are also projecting strength with people, right? Because there are people who are going to depend on you. At the same time, you need to have willpower and persistence to make anything happen, but at the same time, you shouldn't be delusional enough to not know when to cut the cord.
Yeah.
Right? When to not realize that this is actually not going to work. Fundamentally, it's not going to work. My persistence is not going to help, right? So I think the most difficult thing for a founder is to be able to get to that balanced state where because everything you do, like whether it's hiring, you are always balancing between skill, the pay scale, and accountability. Whether it's sticking around, you're balancing between persistence and being realistic. Whether it's everything that you do on a daily basis, you have to kind of figure out that balance. And that, I think, is the most difficult thing if you can achieve. Otherwise, you've chosen a role which is full of taking 100 hard decisions in a day. And there's some things that externally, things will happen. COVID happened, then I landed in a sustainability company by choice. Then Trump happened, right? The similar thing kind of happened again. But your reaction the second time kind of tells you a lot about how much you've matured as a founder, right? So I think it's just kind of learning through the process, being present, and there are going to be tons of difficult decisions.
And you signed up for them. Why you're choosing to be here? You've taken a call.
When you give up, you feel like your life.
Yeah.
So true. So I think what I'm hearing are two big things. One is decision making has to be quick enough where needed. I think that's one that we also double down a lot. Sometimes founders take too long to make the choice or decide what they need to do. Sometimes that is detrimental to a lot of the processes, systems, or just this whole survival of the company. And second, I think to be able to anchor yourself in a way where you're able to balance out, how you would want to actually lead. Because at the end of the day, we're all leaders, right? If you're building a company, you're also evolving into a leader over time. And I think one just follow-up question on that before we move on to the next one is, how do you guys anchor yourselves? Like, do you have something that whenever there's a tough moment, you go back to? Is it having a conversation? Is it just, maybe just isolating and just recharging by yourself? What are those anchors for you guys?
Yeah, so for me, I think, again, it comes with experience and it comes with some maturity as a founder. So a few years into kind of the journey, you are not the company, right? So in the beginning, whatever you're building feels like, for me, it felt like I have 2 kids and PopXO was my 3rd child, right? It literally felt like that. I identified that closely with the company. But then, you need to have that attachment to the company to basically build it, right? So in the beginning, it's great. But ultimately, for your own personal and mental well-being, if you're able to have that love, regard, concern for the company as if it is you, right? That's fine. But you also have to always remember you are not the company, right? You've taken money from investors. You are custodians for their money, right? But if you're able to distinguish between you, the person, and the company, and there's a little bit of air gap in the middle, I think for me, that is where founder sanity actually lies. Because that air gap basically allows you to step back from a problem and imagine that something's gone really bad at work, right? It's all like basically kind of, it's like it's lit up and you really don't know what to do. if you were to identify 100% of the company, you will feel that your life has gone up in flames, right? And then you will not have the perspective to do anything about the problem. So if you're able to say, hey, okay, I see this huge problem, the company is in a lot of trouble, but I am safe. I am X person, I have X amount of experience, I have X amount of people in the world who respect what I do. I can step out tomorrow, I can still kind of fend for myself, fend for my family, and I will be okay. So first thing for me is when things are really messed up is you secure yourself first, personally. Because only once you're able to do that, then you can go and when they say in the airline, they put the mask on yourself and then you give it to the other person. That's very, very true. Because if you completely identify with the company, when you feel that the company is in trouble, you're personally in trouble, you'll never be able to do anything logically for it. So I think as founders, find that distance that's very important. That's a logical distance that you need. And then you're able to take decisions in the best interest of the company. That just find that air gap between the company and yourself.
Yeah, I just want to take up her point that you're not the company, but your mental health in early days is all that the company is.
That is true.
If that is not right, then the company is screwed.
Yeah.
Right? So how you'll not be able to say that you'll get the same work-life balance that you would get in a job. Right? So that transition you still have to make. As a founder, you need to be obsessed about the problem. You need to be thinking about it 24/7. But you need to figure out, you have work, you have family, you have health, and you have personal time. I think if work definitely cannot, you shouldn't sacrifice. But if you're sacrificing more than 2 out of the other 3, then I think you are not taking enough time to zoom out and really understand and assimilate what the real problems are. Then you're just operationally so obsessed with day-to-day problems that you're not able to get enough perspective in a zoomed out way to be able to find a sustainable solution to those problems, right? So I think your mental health and whatever works for everybody. There are people, I have friends for whom it's important that every day they take 2 hours to work out, right? Or they take 2 hours dinner with family, right? Then I have friends who basically they can obsess about the problem Monday to Sunday endlessly, 24/7. But after every 3 months, they will just hibernate for a week, right? They'll just disappear. So that rhythm, what works for you, that's up to you. But having that, as Priyanka rightly mentioned, air gap to make sure that you have enough time to zoom out and get a zoomed out perspective on what things are, and not just get burnt down by day-to-day operations. Because you just
it's very easy to get burned out, by the way.
You're just in a reactive mode, right? You're just reacting to things that
and you're reacting to things not in your control. That's like the problem, right? It's not like you're everything that's coming at you is coming from outside your control.
My last whole year was like that. Like I did 0 physical exercise, and that was the only time I ever did that because it was so busy on our end. And we're also scaling now in multiple ways, growing in cohort size or portfolios. And I always had an experience and I this. And I think I made this decision now 6 months ago, and it's the best thing I did. 1 hour is just mine during the day, and it really helps. In fact, one of our portfolio companies actually struggled a lot because one of the founders felt so unwell that he had to be hospitalized. And this was not something he could have avoided if he took care of himself, right? It was a condition he was aware of and just didn't.
And it's not a badge of honor, by the way.
Yeah, he was like, no, my work comes first. And then, and he was just not there for it. We have actually 2 such portfolio companies, which is why this topic is really important, because we've spoken a lot about the business side of things, but I wanted to kind of touch.
I know investors actually take it as good investors take it as a red flag.
Yeah.
Right. Oh my God, I'm so busy all the time. You really, you think of Bezos, right? Running 3 multi-billion-dollar companies. If you can run 3 of those, you can definitely run one of those, which is not that large.
Yeah.
Without kind of burning yourself out, right? So all of us have the same 24 hours in the day. It's not like he has more or you have less. You have exactly the same. It's basically how you're able to optimize for it without sacrificing yourself, relationships?
I think really, really helpful. I think now we're just for the last, questions before we open for any Q&A that, you guys have any questions you can ask. Just the last piece, the first check, right? Just going to switch to that. What are some things that founders should optimize for in the first check? Because that's really important. We have spoken to, of course, numerous founders across cohorts, and I have so many commonalities that I can see across all early stage founders. But as a founder, because you've done that many times over, what would the first, few things be that you should optimize for in that first check? Maybe pre-seed and seed we can cover. And, because there's a lot of conversation around valuation versus choosing the right investors and we also spoke about how sometimes you don't have a choice, right? So I think just want to touch upon that very briefly before we close.
I think in 99.9% cases, you won't have a choice, right? So, and it's in a way, I think a moot question to think about. But having said that, if you are one of those fortunate ones who do have a choice, I would say I would choose of course, the first bare minimum that you're getting enough money, right? That's important, so that you at least have 18 to 24 months of runway. The second important indicator for me would be if I have like 3 options, which one of them is most likely to help me either raise the next round or will be able to support me through the next round, right? So I would keep investors' help limited to fundraising only, because I honestly don't think from an operational perspective, even the best of investors are able to support you with few things, except maybe if you're in an enterprise business, then maybe some introductions, maybe some bit of hiring and all that. But other than that, I don't think, and unfortunately in India, most investors are not operators. So
yes.
They've never built a business, they've never run a business. So, I would kind of stray away from even taking that advice or take it with a pinch of salt. But yeah, anybody who is kind of meeting your threshold in terms of the amount that you need and can potentially help you in the next fundraise is what my metric would be. Valuation and all that, I think in the long term, it all kind of balances out. You raise an early round at a very low valuation, but if your business does very well, in next 2 to 3 rounds, you'll cover that dilution gap eventually, right? But I think getting that right is probably the only thing to look for.
Yeah, same. So, also cool. Yeah, I think this is also kind of similar to what we've also seen. I think that we were talking, me and Asha was about it, that time is really valuable, right? For a founder, the most important thing is time. Where you want to spend it, the energy you're spending, also fundraising. It really matters how you are optimizing for your time. So sometimes when we really overthink the price and like compare term sheets and like just waste time doing that, I think it also costs you and the company. So it's really important to, in your early days, move fast and make sure that the momentum that you're building also stays, right? So, Craig, I think with that, I'm good in terms of questions. Thank you so much for being so open and candid.